What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters Live. I'm David Wilson. We're back again with another Friday stream where we get together as a community and talk about whatever topic it is that I've come up with for the week. But this week is a little bit different because this week I have a special guest who is Christine Lemmer-Webber, the executive director of the Spritely Institute. We'll introduce Christine in a little while, but we're just going to get through with the usual jibber jabber and news, etc., that we do at the beginning of the stream. So let me see if I can fix my screen so you can see what's happening here, because who the hell knows what's going on. Setting this while the stream is going is very risky, but there we go. Okay, I think the stream's working. Let me know in the chat if anything goes wrong, because things are pulling a little bit more resources this time than they usually are, and I don't really know how it's going to go, but we're going to try it. We're going to see what happens here. All right, let me just jump into the chat real quick and say hello to the folks who are here so far. I see Case already talking about jibber jabber, which is great. Let's see. We've got Gun, Benoit, Case, E-Beam, Peter, J. Fred, Dave. Hope you're feeling better, Dave. Christine, obviously. Glenn, Waxier Tape, Einar, AFM Victoria. Let's see, who else? Big Edie, Cow, Arnaud, Eric. Kay says, David is in front of void. Yes, it's the void of my soul. As I try to prepare for streams on time, things often don't go so well, you know? You have to go pick up your kid from school like right before the stream, and then there's some moron who's parked their car right in the road that you're trying to leave from, and you have to wait for 5 minutes because their kid is screaming. They're trying to shove their kid in the car, and the kid doesn't want to go. So what am I supposed to do about that? I don't know. I guess leave my house earlier? Maybe. You know, sue me, okay? It's what happens. On Friday nights, things are a little bit crazy. It's been raining like crazy in Greece the last couple days, so I don't know. Things are a little bit chaotic. Kay says, you said jibber jabber? I did. Is that right? When you figured it out, it was like, oh, right? Okay, sure. Eric says, good afternoon, looking forward to Emacs Conf. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. Your kid was at school at like 8 p.m.? It's not 8 p.m. here, dude. It's, as you can see right up here, in my tab bar, it's 6:16 p.m. I went to go pick up the kid at like 5:15. Friday nights do get lit. Okay. Oh, okay. Over on the YouTube side, I see Mike, Jerry, Daphne. I see you, Daphne. Let's see who else. Interpreters Co-op, Ezekiel, Mjolnir's Revenge, Thomas, Antares. Mike says that story is hilarious. Yeah. I'm restraining myself from going into more detail because it's totally ridiculous, but I don't know. This is what happens whenever you have kids in school and the school is on a very small side street and you don't really have control over how the traffic flow goes. What can I do? Hello to Jovan. And Daphne says in the IRC side, and God said, let syntax, there will be lambda, and there was lambda. Yes. God definitely was the author of the scheme compiler. You'll keep ribbing me. You have to rib me, though. That's the whole point of us being here. It's not for me to convey information to you. It's for me to be fighting the people in the chat the whole time, to regain my sense of self-worth, and to feel like, you know, a whole person again. Because I really need that in my life. I need to have a little bit more difficulty and struggle because I really just sit in a chair all day. And this is my one time in the week where I can finally defend myself and try to feel like a full person. Sorry. I have to take it too far. Carpool is the worst. Well, I'm not carpooling. Okay, so let's get into the news. Enough jibber jabber. So, as was mentioned before, Emacs Conf 2024 is this weekend. It's both days, Saturday and Sunday. There's gonna be a lot of really great talks going on there. So I'm sure that many of you who are watching right now are gonna be interested in checking that out. If you go look at the actual conference page, there's a listing of talks there. Okay, that's not the right page. Anyway, if you check out the talks page, you'll see the whole listing of talks. There's a number of really cool talks. The one I'm most excited about, if I can find the link in here somewhere, did I actually get it, or is it somewhere else now? There it is. It's the talk by Robin Templeton about basically it's not really a reboot. It's more like a reinitiation of the work on Guile Emacs. If you didn't know this, Robin Templeton, who also worked at the Spritely Institute or helped out on some stuff there earlier this year, they also were part of the call that we had with Christine, Robin, and Dave. Probably was like March or something. I don't remember exactly when that was. But Robin is I think the original author of the effort to basically port Emacs over to Guile Scheme. And that kind of got shelved for a while, but now Robin's back at it again. I think that Robin has some contributors as well that are helping with the project. So this talk is going to be about that effort to basically port Emacs over to Guile Scheme, which would be a pretty interesting thing if it works, because you would have a real language as the basis of Emacs instead of Emacs Lisp, which is kind of a real language, but it's kind of like a toy language. I'm going to really make some people upset by saying that, but I'm a scheme enthusiast, so I have to give a little bit of heat on the whole which Lisp is the real Lisp debate. So sorry if I upset you, but check out Robin's talk because it will be interesting, if nothing else. In a related note, there's another talk by Ramin Honori, who is... Ramin shows up on the stream sometimes. I talked to Ramin on Fediverse, but Ramin is giving a talk about his clone of Emacs and eLisp written in Scheme. So we got another angle at getting Emacs and Emacs Lisp working in Scheme. So those two talks should be pretty interesting, I think. Case says, Emacs Lisp is a real language. Is it? I don't know. I mean, it is a language. It works. It has a bytecode compiler and a native just-in-time compiler. So I guess, is it a language or is it just an extension language? Can you write a production application with it that doesn't require Emacs? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to make some people angry. That's okay. Another talk by Peter Prevost, Emacs Writing Studio. Peter is also a member of the community. Emacs 30 highlights by PCal. I think that should be pretty interesting for those who are excited about the new Emacs 30 that should be coming out relatively soon. Literate programming for the 21st century. Howard Abrams is kind of the steward of literate programming in the Emacs community. I guess he's the one who has made the most interesting talks about it, or at least, among the most interesting talks about it. So he's got another talk on literate programming in Emacs. You should definitely check that out. And then Colin Woodbury, otherwise known as Foskers, is another member of the System Crafters community, giving a talk on transducers, which is basically a library for closure-like transducers in Emacs Lisp. Or at least that's what I think it is, because I know that Colin has done this in Common Lisp as well. So it's kind of Colin's thing. He just likes putting transducers in places, which is cool. So check out those talks and all the other talks this weekend. I'll try to get to some of them if I can, but you never know. You never know. I didn't actually get a talk submitted in time because I didn't think of a topic and I had many other things going on. So I'm not participating this year. Maybe next year. We'll see. Let me just check on what's going on in the chat. Christine says, David Will is the one and only YouTube influencer endorsed by the Spritely Institute. I really don't like the sound of YouTube influencer. It really scares me a little bit. YouTube influencer. That sounds like a slur almost. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, I'm copying text here. Yeah, Christine's just trolling me. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. We're talking about Done It in the chat. That's good. I never finished our Done It playthrough. That was 2 years ago, right after I moved to Greece. So we should probably do that sometime. Ben Wise is telling Case that toy languages are still real languages. Sure, they're still real languages. I don't know. I just want to piss people off a little bit today. You got to spice up the Friday a little bit, get some people watching. Influencer and content creator. No. I'm a haphazard information sharer. I share information that's interesting to me, and hopefully people watch it. Lately, not so much. That's my fault. Like and subscribe, smash that like button. Lo-Fi says, how did you get introduced to Emacs? I was kidnapped by a cult of shadowy figures, and I was placed in front of a computer with nothing else but an unconfigured Emacs, and I had to figure out how to get out of the situation, but also out of Emacs, because, how are you supposed to get out of Emacs? Isn't it worse than Vim? I know you have :Q in Vim to exit, but how do you exit Emacs? I'm just making up conspiracy theories again. Thought leader and trendsetter? Probably not. I don't think that works anymore. Okay. Christine says, Morgan trolls me frequently by calling me a social media expert. Well, you kind of are in a sense because you made a social media protocol. And also you have quite a following on social media. So I think it kind of works. It makes sense. All right, let me get back to the news. So the Git Good workshop starts this weekend. It's a new thing I'm doing. Basically, it's a workshop where I'll teach you everything you need to know about Git, from the basic commands to advanced techniques like Git rebase and Git cherry pick, which some people might say, oh, cherry pick, that's not very advanced. Well, maybe for some people it is. I don't know. But that's not all. Along the way, I'll also be teaching you how Git manages everything internally so that you actually understand how it works under the hood. It's actually really interesting. And the realization that I came to while I was learning this is that Geeks is kind of like Git for your operating system. We're not going to be talking about Geeks in this context, but a lot of the same ideas apply, and probably they were inspired by, or at least the Nix model might have been inspired by Git somewhat. So if you're interested in learning about Git and get a little bit of extra sort of inside knowledge about why it works, check out the Git Good workshop, which is the first instance of that is this weekend. It's one session, 4 hours. I know it's a little bit long. That's probably why some people haven't signed up for it. I'm sorry. I tend to overdo it a little bit. Come anyway if you want. You don't have to stay the whole time. So it's Sunday starting at 9 a.m. UTC. So if you go to the link there for the workshop, I've got a page that will show you the time in your own time zone. So go check that out. And then there's another one next Sunday, December 15th at 1600 UTC, different times on both days so that it can reach people in different parts of the world, etc. So go check out the website for that for more information about what we are going to be covering. And if you can't make those dates, keep an eye out for more dates that will be announced for January. You can do that by subscribing to the System Crafters newsletter. The link is systemcrafters.net/newsletter. Okay. And I forgot to put in this list that there's another thing going on right now, which is the quote unquote Black Friday deal on my hands-on Guile scheme for beginners course. If you go to systemcrafters.net/courses/hands-on Guile scheme beginners, you'll get information on that course. It basically teaches you the fundamentals of Scheme, the fundamentals of functional programming as they are related to Scheme, and just in general functional programming, and then how to do practical application development using Guile Scheme, and also how to use Emacs to do Guile Scheme development. So the point of bringing this up is that the Black Friday deal is $50 off of the price of the course. This is an on-demand course that you can take at your leisure. All of the videos and the written material are available to you basically forever. So check that out if you're interested. Maybe throughout the course of this interview and stream, you'll become more interested in learning Scheme. So you can check out this course as a way to learn Scheme if you want to. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, lastly and most importantly, I want to mention that the Spritely Institute is having a fundraiser this month. We're going to chat with Christine later in the stream about this in more detail. She could tell you a lot more about it than I can, but I did want to call it out right up front. If you go to the Spritely Institute website, spritely.institute, there's a banner up at the top that gives you some context on that, but there's also a donate page that tells you more about how to donate and sort of what the rewards are for becoming a donor. But the rewards are not really the important part. The important part is that the Spritely Institute is doing some really important work to build a platform and technologies to make it easy to, or let's say easier to develop distributed applications that enable kind of communities to be developed on the internet, among other things, and also to respect user privacy and many other aspects of things that Christine will be able to explain better to you. I'm doing a terrible job at this, but the point is that I think that what the work that Spritely Institute is doing is extremely important, not just for the internet, but also for the Scheme ecosystem, because some really interesting work is happening on Scheme and Guile Scheme specifically by the Spritely Institute. So if you are interested in the work that they're doing, please consider donating to their efforts so that they can continue doing this for a very long time. I think it would be a great thing if we did that. But like I said, Christine will give you more details on that when we start talking in just a moment. So that's it for the news. Did I miss anything? Did I miss anybody? Anything in the chat that I missed that I absolutely have to talk about? Let me see. Transducer is so hot right now. Is that right? Let me see if I miss anything in the YouTube chat, because I don't really see it moving. Throw a little Tabasco on what case? What are we talking about? You wouldn't pick a chair. What's happening in the chat right now? I don't understand it. Get resource bits and booze. Okay. Sounds like you probably won't remember much after that's over with. Tabasco goes on all the things. Yes, it does. That's true. Alrighty. We got to all get into transducers. Yeah, sure. It's just more functional programming. I mean, that's all it is. All right, so today we're going to be chatting with the executive director of the Spritely Institute, Christine Lemmer-Webber, about the work that they've been doing over the last couple of years to build a better platform for developing distributed, community-centric apps. Let me get Christine up on the screen. Oh, there she is, and she is obviously my overlord. She is watching over me to make sure that I'm doing a good job of explaining things here, which I have not been. So Christine will have to help me correct that. Hello, Christine. I'm very happy to have you on the show again. Can you say something just to make sure everything's working, the audio?
Hello. Is the audio working?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
It's all good.
Okay, great.
So let me know in the chat if the stream is lagging. It seems like it's lagging a little bit on my side. I hope it's not lagging entirely. Okay.
Like my audio versus video?
No, I think that you and I are all good. I see that the YouTube stream seems to be lagging a little bit, but I don't know if that's real or not. So stop motion. Oh boy. Okay, let me stop a couple things here. Maybe if I make this smaller, let's just do this little job here. If I can drag this. This is the lovely thing about using Sway is that the targets are super tiny and I don't have my key binding set up. Let's just drag it right there. Sorry, Christine can't see what I'm doing right now, so she's probably very confused about what I'm doing.
Well, apparently my video is maybe lagging, but yours is not.
Okay, let me see if this is improved. It's improved? Tell me in the chat what's going on. Video's lagging still? It's going great.
It might be my end. I'm not sure.
No, it's definitely my end because I think the laptop's a little bit overloaded with the multiple streams going on. Is it paused entirely at this point? Case says, David will fundraiser to get him a better graphics card. It's definitely not a graphics card issue, I'll tell you that. It's just a driver issue. It's incredible to me that it's so bad because I see OBS, everything's working just fine. So it must be a bandwidth issue. Video's lagging, audio's fine. All right, let me think of how I can, if I could bump the video quality down, perhaps. Sorry, Christine, let me get this thing worked out.
I'm already using a 15-year-old camera, so my video quality is low as crap. So, I don't mind if we go any lower.
Okay, let's see. Trying to see if I can fix that. Wonderful. I don't know if this is going to help.
Well, some people are saying maybe better.
Is it better now? Okay, it does seem to be improving. Okay, I think it's getting better. All right. Sorry about that. Christine, thank you again for being here and for tolerating the poor production quality of the whole operation. Please.
I'm happy to be here in whatever frame rate we can get.
Okay, great. So please feel free to introduce yourself because I do a terrible job at introducing people. So just let the people know who you are and what you do.
So hi, I'm Christine Lemmer-Webber. I'm the executive director of the Spritely Institute, as you may have picked up by the title of this particular episode. But I'm gonna do the Simpsons Troy Lemur thing. You may also know me from such productions as I co-author of the ActivityPub specification, which connects together the Fediverse, Mastodon and PeerTube and MissKey or Sharky or whatever version of key you want, and GoToSocial, all those different things. So that's kind of what I think I'm historically known for. I think in many ways, I'm just going to be completely upfront. I think the stuff that we're doing at Spritely, it does build on a lot of that work. In fact, one of the co-founders of the Spritely Institute is Jessica Talon, who is our founding technologist at the Spritely Institute. She co-founded the org with me and is also worked on ActivityPub on and was co-author of that. But we're doing a lot of next generation stuff. We do use Scheme and are all Lisp fans here. I think you have to be a Lisp fan to work at Spritely, but we're in, and therefore by default we're also all using Emacs. We do believe in a future where you don't have to be a fan of Emacs to be able to use Lisp, but that's kind of another topic for another time. The reason that we're using Lisp is we have this motto, which is like Lisp is clay, right? So we're doing next generation research for decentralized networking tech, and because of that, we're doing a bunch of things in terms of kind of changing the nature of the way that you write decentralized programs, and it's much harder to do that in any other environment than it is in Lisp. I think there's a reason why like in the computer science world continues to mine all the work that happened at like the MIT AI lab and so on, like, and so forth for decades. And that's just because, it's the way that you could, a great place to be able to figure out how things should work, even if the rest of the world takes it and doesn't somehow embrace the parentheses because they have poor taste. So anyway, I'm gonna step back from the Lisp fangirling. I know I'm kind of speaking to the choir here a little bit, and I will hand it back to you. Was that a sufficient intro? Did we cover the things correctly?
I believe so. I just saw that Daphne said in the chat that she is not a Lisp fan. I kind of find that hard to believe, but maybe it's just a matter of the role that she's been playing recently, that maybe now she's no longer a Lisp fan. I don't know. But okay, yes. There was something you said there that I wanted to pick up on, but then I think that I lost my train of thought. So we're just going to continue.
Lisp is clay, the Spritely Institute, Goblins, one of these things.
Damn, I just totally lost it. That's okay. Let's just keep going, and then maybe it will come back to me or come up as part of the conversation. So people on the channel definitely are aware of the work the Spritely Institute has been doing because we've talked before on the channel before this year. I think we had a stream. I don't remember what month that was, but it was around the time that Guile Hoot was having some of the first public releases. Done a couple game jams with, or at least one game jam this year and one last year with Guile Hoot, which went really well. Did some more hacking with Guile Hoot. So people are familiar with what's going on. I think people are very excited about Goblins as well because it promises something really interesting for the ability to develop networked applications. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I'm sort of setting the context here that the people who watch this channel definitely are fans of the Spritely Institute. I mean, obviously we have Dave come on the stream pretty much every week just to kind of hang out and chat. Dave's the CTO of Spritely Institute, and Christine also drops by from time to time. So, friends of the channel, and we are also friends of the Spritely Institute, so I'm glad to be able to help promote the donations, or sorry, the donation drive. So to get into the more of the scope of what Spritely's trying to accomplish, what are the overall goals for Spritely as they stand right now?
So what we're doing in many ways is picking up off of the work that happened with the decentralized networking work that happened, with ActivityPub and the Fediverse, right? Except that in many ways, Spritely's focus is, what can't we do? Right. So we can build a decentralized Twitter. We can build a decentralized YouTube. We know how to do that type of thing. There's certain things that are not quite as great about it. Like, a node can go down on the Fediverse and then users lose access to their identity and their content. Some of that stuff is very addressable. Early in Spritely's days, actually was me writing some kind of prototype demos that showed how content can survive on the Fediverse. But in many ways, what we're really focused on is something we call the kind of buzz phrase is secure collaboration or secure cooperation, right? So you can think of this as we currently have this idea that there's things like social networks, right, where there's specifically these social applications. And why is that, right? In a certain sense, all software should be able to be as social and cooperative as you would like it to be. And there's lots of things that we can't do in terms of the security, right? And so we build on this history of things called object capability security. So capability security is really interesting because it allows you to be able to build trust, right? You don't have to be in a world where you absolutely trust somebody for all things, right? I can trust, David Wilson to maybe come by and hang out at my house, but I might not trust David Wilson to handle my finances just because David Wilson and I have not put together, had the relevant, reasons to be cooperative in that type of way. Similarly, I might not trust my accountant to come by my house, right? You build trust. It shouldn't be all or nothing, right? So, but part of the thing is that, we wanted to move in the direction of like peer-to-peer, highly secure technology that builds off of capability security. And at one point I wrote up this write-up called OCAP Pub. It was towards networks of consent, and it was basically to describe, here's how we can do basically capability security to provide better user experiences on the Fediverse. And one of the responses we got, the most frequent response we got when talking to Fediverse implementers is, I have no idea how to implement this on top of like Ruby on Rails or Django or etc. Like the way that most people implement web tech today is built up top of things that are designed to be very Web 2.0 perspectives and kind of deliver for these kind of assuming a large corporation handing things to you. And so the default thing you get from these frameworks basically is you get something designed exactly for that. If you want to move towards the direction of much more peer-to-peer, much more secure, focused on a gatekeeper-free experience, it's actually an uphill battle. So the interesting thing about Spritely Goblins is that that's the default thing you get. You write software in Spritely Goblins, and by default, it's peer-to-peer, distributed. It has incredible, ridiculous properties that many people don't even realize they can do. Like it has things like time travel debugging. You can debug problems in the way that they were when it happened. No blockchain involved or anything like that. It's all fast enough that you can have a real-time game where you travel backwards and forwards in time. It has things like security over the network, where it's basically Lambda, the ultimate security model. You basically use lexical scope and ordinary programming techniques to handle your security model so you can focus on the program flow. And we have this protocol called OCAPN, which Goblins uses, that allows you to connect together basically this giant ocean of capability security nodes that can talk to each other. And so it just changes the game basically in terms of doing distributed programming. It even handles a lot of wild things, like you don't even need to think about it. It handles distributed garbage collection. That's just built into the way that Goblins works. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide something so that you can program towards the particular problems you want to solve, and Goblins will give you the ability for it to be as network and cooperative as you want. It'll handle things like persisting your program for you. It'll give you tools like being able to debug very complicated asynchronous programming things and even create visualizations for you, and etc. So most of the people that are probably on the stream are probably familiar with us because of Hoot. Right, you've used Hoot several times on the channel and etc., because that brings Scheme to the browser. That's not the focus of the Spritely Institute. That is a path towards what we're doing. The focus is actually on the distributed programming, and even beyond that, the new user experiences that people will be able to have once these become the defaults in programming. So Hoot is a way of getting our tooling to people in the browser. It just so happens that because we have to solve that problem to be able to get Scheme to everyone, it means that if you're a schemer and you love Lisp and so on, we've also, because we have to solve the problem, you are also getting to benefit from bringing your stuff in the browser. But the really exciting stuff is that Goblins, the full real version of Goblins, is actually just on the verge of coming to the browser. We've had some kind of proto-Goblins versions of things previously, but the real version of Goblins plus Hoot is like a month away,
wow,
I think.
That's excellent. So there was a lot of really amazing things that you described about what Goblins can do in terms of making it easy to write peer-to-peer applications. Can you kind of give us a high-level understanding of how it all works? I mean, I know it's probably going to be difficult to give a high-level understanding without having to get into some of the technical details, but I mean, like, certain things that come to mind for me are, okay, if it's a peer-to-peer network, how do people find each other, or how do you have information replicated across all of the nodes so that nodes don't go down, or you have availability of information if nodes go down. Is there like a kind of a core idea for how all this comes together that someone could kind of take? Is there like a explain to me like I'm five type thing that we can say that might illuminate this for people?
Well, so part of the thing is that Spritely is tackling things on multiple layers. What happens when nodes go down, like the content surviving, is actually on a different layer than Goblins. That's actually something we call Portabella. It's the immutable encrypted storage and the mutable encrypted storage. But it's part of the story, right? So what happened with Spritely is that there was basically, I spent about 4 years doing research after ActivityPub came out to find out, how can we get to that world, right? A fully peer-to-peer, highly cooperative tech that fills in the gaps of what we couldn't do. And so Spritely basically started with a roadmap. If you visit the older Spritely website, which we're working on folding on all the features from the old site into the new website. But if you go to spritelyproject.org, not spritely.institute, which is our new site, you can still see the old roadmap on there. It's like, looks like this monster manual of a bunch of characters. It hasn't been updated in a while, but you can see that all these pieces it's providing. Goblins is the biggest one because that's kind of the foundation of everything else. If you really want to understand Goblins, we have a paper. It's listed on the front page of Spritely.institute called Heart of Spritely. It talks about Goblins and how it works. But to give you the high level idea, the way that Goblins works is basically, it looks like ordinary programming. If you want to get the idea of how you and I could cooperate with each other, so just focusing on the live programming aspect, ignoring the encrypted storage part. If I want to give you access to this particular capability I have to, let's say, you want to send me recipes, right, or something like that. This is a very contrived example, but we're sharing recipes, and I want you to be able to write to that specific thing. I can give you a capability that I hand to you. Right. So the general capability security mindset is, if you don't have it, you can't use it. So I specifically hand you access. Have you ever used Google Docs? There's like the Google Docs share links where like you can go and it says, anybody who has access to this link can edit the document. Right. And if you just don't have that access to that link, you just can't edit the document. Right. So capabilities, that's not quite what a capability is, but it's close enough. That's kind of the idea that you're basically handing somebody a particular context. Now the question is, okay, but how does that work in terms of programming intuitions? This idea of handing somebody something specifically. Well, when you think about it, that's actually exactly how programming works every day, ever since the, GoTo considered harmful days. We've considered that passing around arguments to functions is the right way to be able to do things. You call a function, you pass arguments to it, things come back, right? Now you add asynchronous programming where you can send a message to that, and basically the idea is that you're passing around arguments to functions. So capability security in a programming language environment is, if you've ever read the old scheme papers, Lambda the ultimate, and it's like Lambda the ultimate imperative, Lambda the ultimate whatever. Since we're talking to system crafters audience, this doesn't fly with everybody, but sometimes we jokingly say Lambda the ultimate security model, right? Because that intuition of you're passing an argument to a function is actually sufficient to be able to say, does this thing have access to this thing? Well, did we actually hand it access? So the way that ends up working with the network then is you just do ordinary programming using Goblin semantics. In fact, multiple, like our first chat program, which gives you an end-to-end encrypted connection between two parties in a peer-to-peer network. It was 150 lines of code for both the client code and also the chat room, but the messages were authenticated. And that's only 150 lines of Goblins code. And what was interesting is that entire program was written locally on one machine, and then we just hooked it up to the network with OCAPN, and it just worked, right? Because that's what is happening, is that Goblins is hiding a bunch of stuff to the user. So the average user doesn't have to understand the protocol stuff in this particular case. They can just focus on programming.
Yeah, that's sort of the place where is kind of more cloudy for me. It definitely makes sense how the security model being you have a procedure, let's say, and the parameters that are given to your procedure are what you can call into to act on these resources that are owned by someone else. But there must be something wrapped under that that the protocol sort of enables this security. Like the protocol itself has its own security model, which I don't really know anything about, but then that is sort of translated to just the plain semantics of scheme. So can you say a little bit about like what the protocol aspect of it is?
Mm-hmm. So we have the protocol that we're basically working on. It's an old idea. It's called CAPTP. The particular version that we're doing is called OCAPN. So, and there's a website, ocapn.org. You can think of it as the activity pub for distributed peer-to-peer programming. We do plan on tying into ActivityPub, by the way, but what's actually interesting is that OCAPN is highly efficient and provides other things like the distributed garbage collection and stuff like that, which ActivityPub doesn't have a way to do. So what basically the way that works is actually fairly understandable. Let's say I'm giving you access to that recipe database, read write access, right? And I'm going to give Dave Thompson, I'm going to work with these two Dave/Davids here. I'm going to give Dave Thompson access just to read the recipe database. So I hand that capability over there, and I hand to you the capability to read write over here, right? And for one thing, you can imagine on my machine, the read write, the version that I'm handing our CTO, Dave Thompson, I'm only letting him read. It's not important that he have read write. It's much simpler. What I can do is I can just put an object in front of it that passes forward the read messages, but not the write messages. So it just proxies it. So I'm handing you both these individual objects. How does it work over the network? Well, you can imagine our two machines, right? And then there's this network substrate between them. And basically what I do is I export to you, David Wilson, this access to read write to this database. And the protocol, basically Goblins has machinery that does this behind the scenes. But what it does is it puts in my export table. Let's say I export that capability at the number 42. Now you, on your side, end up getting this invocation that says, oh, Christine sent you a message telling you about this this interesting capability in whatever context it makes sense for you to learn about it. And that is at import 42. So we bidirectionally export and import at the same integers, right? So both of us have an import and an export table that's reversed. It's the inverse, like the mirror on the other side. My exports are your imports are my exports, right? And then we can just refer to them by mere integers. That's how it's able to be so efficient. And so now when we're saying, I'm passing, and I might pass like, a string, and then I might do this, that, and the other thing. But I can actually just efficiently, if you say, I want to invoke that read write thing and use the write method to add a post, right? And then you say the post it's got, like you give some sort of S expression structure that's got like the rich text version of the recipe, right, or something like that. You can put that all in the bot. Like it could basically be the function invocation would be, I'm sending a message to the thing that I'm importing and you're exporting at 42. Add this recipe, and then you've got the recipe contents, right? And so the basically what happens is, one of the beautiful things about OCAPN, people are used to dealing with protocols where they spend a lot of time thinking about the protocol, right? They spend time creating the messages and creating all the individual things that are pushed over the wire. You don't have to do that. In a certain sense, what we're doing is providing a layer of abstraction that raises the bar in terms of what you can get done. The same way that, like, TCP and TLS are both examples where, TLS/SSL, it makes it so that you don't have to think about that, how that encrypted protocol, like the encryption works. Similarly, you don't have to think in your program about how the message is getting sent to this object, because our OCAPN stuff takes care of that for you in Goblins. You can just focus on the the logic.
Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense to me now. So basically, the OCAPN protocol or the CAP-TP protocol, it has its own sort of semantics for sending messages and advertising capabilities back and forth between peers. But the Goblins machinery actually makes it more convenient because it sort of takes some of the responsibility away from the person writing the application of having to know anything about the protocol or what to do. You're just getting a function that has already been sort of wired up to the other peer correctly because it was sort of imported by you. It was advertised to you, then imported by you. Now you can just invoke this function, and then Goblins just takes care of the rest, sending the message. It could be whatever, the content of the message could be anything effectively. And then it knows which method is being invoked just purely by the ID that has been assigned to that method, I guess.
Yeah, so that's more or less correct. Actually, methods are not actually a fundamental thing in our they're just a convention. Basically, like, certain objects take methods, and if they have methods, it's just the first symbol of the set of arguments. But it's just a convention. Effectively, in Goblins, the cool thing is that it's basically, remember when I said Lambda, the ultimate security model? It's also Lambda, the ultimate actor model. Like, it's basically each Goblin's object is actually just a reference and then a current procedure. So the current procedure is the behavior that the actor basically is going to do when it gets an incoming message, and it could be any procedure, right? It could just multiply some things together. It could write something to a disk. It could do whatever. But certain objects are going to want to have like a multiplicity of functionality, right? That's where methods come in. So that's why methods are a convention in Goblins and OCAPN. They're not necessarily the case because it's Lambda, the ultimate actor model, basically.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, so it's more of an object system with methods than it is procedures or just functions you're calling across the wire. I'm thinking in a very scheme-centric way here. All right, let me get to some questions that were happening in the chat. First of all, John Hamlick says, how does Goblins compare to something like Erlang's OTP?
So I haven't spent a lot of time with Erlang. My understanding with Erlang is that it tends to assume a cluster of nodes that tend to trust each other a lot more. Like, usually you're setting up an Erlang cluster of things that are like planning on working together. And the capability aspects, you could apply them to Erlang. But in actually, Erlang would be great to make a implementation of OCAPN for. But my understanding is that like there's not as much assumption of like, if you don't have it, you can't use it in the Erlang world. So the capability security stuff is not as baked in. So that would be kind of my main response. But I have not spent a lot of time in the Erlang world.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I haven't looked at it at all. I haven't used Erlang in probably 15 years, so I'm really out of date on what's going on there. Glenn asks, what does success look like for the Spritely Institute in 5 to 10 years? That's probably a pretty big question to ask right now, but I guess we can go ahead and pose that if you want to respond to it.
It's a great question, actually. So, within where we are right now, right, has been very focused on this low-level tooling, right? If you're a scheme enthusiast, you're probably a lot more excited about Spritely. If you're a Fediverse enthusiast and you're not into scheme and Lisp, you're probably excited that some people who know what's happening with the Fediverse are working on the future of stuff for that space, right? But the direction that we want to go is actually getting our tools in users' hands, right? We're not just focused on stuff for developers, right? We want things to be for developers because we want to change the game of peer-to-peer programming, and that's what we've been focusing on, right? So our primary focus as of now, because I think it's important to hear this before we get to where we're going to be, our primary focus as of now has been changing the game so that you don't have to be a peer-to-peer protocol designer to be a peer-to-peer programmer. You can just be a programmer, right? And if you're just a programmer, then you're able to actually build peer-to-peer applications, which is not currently the way that it is, right? And thinking about security is way too hard in peer-to-peer programs before using the kinds of tooling that Spritely brings in. So that's our foundation, right? And if you read Heart of Spritely, it gives you a bit of idea about like how that foundation kind of looks from a technical perspective. But the very fact that we have Hoot, it isn't just because we think WebAssembly is cool. We do think WebAssembly is cool. Actually, I think WebAssembly is a game changer because it means that JavaScript is not the only game in town in a web-based environment. However, the reason that we took that big bet, and we're really grateful that we were given the support from the MetaMask folks to be able to make that big bet. The reason we made that big bet was because we need to be able to get our stuff to users, right? In fact, the reason that those folks actually supported us is that they have had to learn the need for capability security themselves, because they have, whether you're a blockchain enthusiast or not, it's certainly going to be clear that that if you have the most popular cryptocurrency wallet in the world, you're going to be the #1 attacked source in the world. So they found their way to capability security, and thus ran into why Spritely stuff was interesting and said, how can we help? And we said, well, and they're like, how can we get your stuff in the browser? And we're like, great, we love help with that. And so that's how Hoot happened, basically. So we need to get our stuff in the browser in order for our goals to succeed, right? We're very focused on distributed programming. In terms of like focusing on end users, but having a path to be able to build out that vision that we have. In the next few years, I think in the next year, 1 year out from now, what you'll see is the first demos that are really kind of for, let's say, if we're thinking about what happened with the Fediverse, if you're more familiar with that, which more of our audience here probably are, if you think about the early days of the Fediverse, like maybe when like Mastodon was just coming on the scene, right? Like you had people who were, they kind of were aware of this decentralized networking thing, but they had to be really willing to experience a lot of kind of rough edges from a, interface perspective and so on and so forth. They had to be believers in the tech. By necessity, the early versions of user interface things we're going to be building, because we're going to be figuring out a lot of work in the secure user interface perspective side of things, is going to be in that type of category. And we actually are looking for the type of people who are excited about, like it might listen to this stream, to not only be experiencing our tech, but actually playing around with what the user interfaces are. So in the next year, you're going to start to see more and more of that happen now that we have Goblins appearing in the browser. And so the next kind of phase from there, if you kind of like, look, a couple of years out from here, is where we kind of get like the people who, look at where the Fediverse was maybe like 5 years ago, right? It's still enthusiasts, but it's also starting to get to the direction of like activists, right? You get people who really believe that they need this because, like basically the Fediverse had this big influx of queer people who needed an alternative to Twitter, right? That's a kind of direction that we're hoping to be like basically a couple years out from here, where, we're able to hit the people who are able to start using and playing with this stuff, who are still willing to take a certain amount of rough edges, but are not as interested in the tech details, right? And then so about 3 years out from here is where I hope that we hit the point where like this tech starts to hit everybody, right? And so 5 years out, if we're getting all the way to 5 years out, I hope that we're at the point that ActivityPub is now, where all sorts of projects are picking up the stuff that we're doing. We're intentionally describing ourselves as a research institute, that we chose the name Spritely Institute very intentionally. Our former executive director, Randy Farmer, and I spent a lot of time talking about how we should describe the Spritely Institute, and we decided on the name Institute partly because we actually want people to take the tech that we're doing and lift it and kind of run away with it, and like make it actually the default way that tech starts to be developed. So in a certain sense, we're an organization where we want you to steal our tech, right? We want you to attribute us, give us credit for the work that we've done, but we want our tech to spread as far as possible. So 5 to 10 years out, like we recently had a call internally. It was like, oh, what happens when we get to the point where we've actually built our applications? Are we done? And then my view is, once you're at that point, well, that's where all the fun stuff is, right? Like that's when you get to build the really cool applications every day that is opened up by this world. So that's kind of the path that we're going down.
That sounds really cool to me. The thing that I kind of not predict, but would like to see is for people like Emacs users, let's say, or someone who's using a very malleable environment, it would be much easier for them to interface with things like an activity pub, like social media network, or any other service that exposes their functionality over Goblins or something that is using the same protocols underneath. That way, you are basically just calling functions at that point. You're importing some service from the internet, and you're just calling functions without having to actually understand the protocol, what the transport layer is for that, sort of how to serialize messages. Like you're just forgetting all these things, and you're just able to call right into whatever you want. Because for people like us who are on this channel, we tend to like crafting our own environment, I guess, and if you have more tools available to you to participate in the peer-to-peer decentralized web, let's say, then you can kind of live in your own environment, but then you get all the benefits of everything that's out there, rather than having to like write bespoke applications or use things that are made by other people. So that's kind of what I'm excited about. I don't really know if that is a real consequence of what's being developed, but that's what I kind of imagine.
No, I think that's completely in alignment, right? So like we want to be building a very participatory internet, right? Um, I think people who are on system crafters tend to be people who are really excited about building and taking part in things. And what's a little bit sad though is that it's a very uphill battle these days to even be able to take that kind of perspective, right? Computing is moving further and further away from a world where people are able to really participate in and have computing be part of their life. And if you care about computing being part of your life, you're constantly also fighting an uphill battle because you have to interact with the rest of the world, right? So when we say we're building new foundations for the internet, where secure collaboration is possible, we want that to be for multiple layers of things, right? For the system crafters type audience, we want to make it possible for people who listen to this kind of channel to be able to kind of push the edge of where things go, right? If you remember the early Firefox days, you may remember that there was this explosion of like extensions that people were doing and stuff like that. Grease Monkey was popular. People were really playing with what the web was in a way that's much harder to do today. We want people to feel like they are part of the internet, and not every user has to do that to that level, right? Not every user has to be messing with the system, but the barrier to entry to be able to mess with the system should be low enough that enough people are making changes, and those changes are happening not from a highly corporate environment where the network reflects the kinds of needs and good experiences that everyday people deserve.
Very cool. Let's see. Glenn had another question. What are the key challenges Spritely Institute is facing in building a decentralized future, and how are you addressing them? Hard questions, Glenn.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. The biggest challenge we're facing is funding, right? So when at the start of this episode, you mentioned that we were running a donor drive, and so it's at spritely.institute/donate. We are a small nonprofit. We were very lucky that within the first few years of the organization, we got some really solid funding from some grants that really let us do exactly what we needed to do. We are trying to establish a strong funding sources that can keep us focused on the mission that we have. So joining as a supporter is actually it makes a big difference. Sometimes people wonder whether or not their individual donations matter when it's going to some sort of big organization and it's within this thing. We're at the size of organization where every donation makes a huge difference. So a lot of my job these days actually is trying to figure out what is the next things that, like how do I make sure that we keep things alive there? But actually, I'm gonna jump in. I just saw Kate's question about what do I think the current status of Guile is, because I think this is actually relevant. one of the things that's really important is that we need to be able to see the ecosystem of Guile and Scheme succeed, right? We are placing a big bet on this ecosystem. We're doing a lot of work there with Hoot and with Goblins and all the tools that we're making. We really need to see this whole ecosystem be able to succeed. And in order to do that, we need to be able to see tools to actually get in the browser where you don't have to be an Emacs user, right? So one of the big things that I want to see is actually a full development environment in the browser for non-Emacs users to be able to build out Goblins programs. That's kind of the direction that I think things need to go. I think Guile in general actually really needs more support. I think we need to, it's been very focused on Andy Wingo, and Andy Wingo is, brilliant and incredible. We really need to be able to make sure that it is a project that's well supported, that has resources flowing into it, and we can't provide all of that ourselves. So in a certain way, your individual donations help. If you can convince, like if you work for an organization that you think also might help, that they're getting to donate to us is also really huge. But also, here's an interesting thing. You should use Guile and Hoot and stuff like that at your work. I think if you are in a position where you are able to be bold enough to use that stuff for your work, maybe you're starting a new startup and you're being in the position of what tech should I use, right? Be bold about it. Choose Guile, choose Hoot, and etc. Because as we've seen, I think in many ways, we're not the only ones using it, but the fact that Spritely and Geeks both exist in the Guile ecosystem has actually raised the ability of Guile to be a really viable environment to a high degree. And I'll also say, actually, I think System Crafters has done a lot there as well, because you've helped kind of get these as exciting environments in front of a lot more people. So we're investing in the ecosystem. We really would like to see other orgs invest heavily in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, definitely. One thought they just had related to something you said about getting organizations to donate. If any of you work at a larger company who likes to do donation matching to nonprofits, you can definitely do that. I think with a one-time donation, you can make a one-time donation and get your company to match your donation. A lot of them will do matching up to some certain dollar amount or something. So that would be another way to really kind of use your employee leverage to help the Spritely Institute. So definitely consider doing that as well.
We are a 501c3 registered nonprofit in the U.S. So if you are in the U.S., donations are tax deductible, and for a lot of organization people who are working at for profits that are looking for donations, it's an important aspect to be able to consider that in the U.S. at least.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah. In terms of like, because I like Kite's question about sort of the state of the Guile ecosystem. I think that Guile could benefit so much from just being a little bit more organized, I think. Not really so much in the development process. I mean, development process also matters, but in marketing, like Guile really needs to hit the next level in terms of presenting itself as a viable option as a programming language for people to try. Because I think that Guile is probably the most practical of the scheme implementations. There's many scheme implementations, and many of them are really great. Obviously, Racket is technically a scheme implementation, but I'm not really going to count it because it kind of is going off in its own direction. Really good tech, but it's not so much a scheme anymore. I think Guile has the chance to be the kind of friendly scheme environment for everyone. So I've said multiple times on the channel, I think that if the community got together to try to like really focus some effort on improving just the way the Guile is presented. I mean, the homepage is fine the way it is right now, but I feel like there's just a lot of work to be done to kind of show what the benefits of Scheme are, and maybe make new really interesting new libraries that solve certain problems people have. Show some idiomatic larger scale programs being developed, like web applications, even desktop applications, etc. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. So if people are interested in ways to contribute to Guile Scheme that aren't really just working on the compiler directly, creating new libraries, making example applications, or even developing full applications that maybe they're free software or at least open source so that people can look at the code. but just give an example of how someone is actually choosing and using Guile to write programs. Now, I feel like with the advent of Guile Hoot, which maybe we'll get into a little bit more in just a second, um, the ability to write a fully fledged web application, and not just web application in the browser, but application that can be run on the desktop machine, run in the mobile application, etc., in Scheme with fully fledged Scheme, not some hacky compiled to JavaScript stuff. That is much more compelling for someone who wants to write applications in Scheme, because if you write standard Guile, you have to have the Guile runtime on the target machine, whatever. But if you have the ability to write Scheme and have it run directly in the browser and potentially do interactive development in the browser with an embedded editor or something, that makes it a lot more doable for programmers who are curious about Scheme and want to have a practical way to apply it somehow. So I think that the work on Guile Hoot is extremely important for bringing Scheme to more people, because it will be probably the most practical option for game development in Scheme and application development in Scheme. And obviously, Guile itself could be the back end. Normal Guile could be the back end for web services, etc. But I think the front end is a lot more important these days, because that's the face of the application. And if you can write that in Scheme, then you have a bigger chance to benefit from what Scheme provides.
So on this note, Hoot's getting better all the time, as I know because you've tried it in its earliest days and have tried it successively since then. In the early days, if an exception happened, you had no idea what was happening, right? And nowadays, you actually can get a backtrace and etc. in your browser. So things have been improving, but what and things are about to get a lot better in the upcoming release, because we've been working towards more and more of a real full eval. If you go to spritely.institute/hoot, you can actually play with a REPL in your browser, but you can't use user-defined macros. That's about to change in the next release. User-defined macros in the interpreter for doing live development is actually appearing very soon. But what actually I would really like to see is, I think if you were going to make a choice, if you're doing work for your work, and you said, well, which part of the whole ecosystem can I pick up and use right now? Why not try Hoot, right? We're right at the point right now where I think it's still early days relative to where Hoot will go, but it's late days enough where things actually, I think, work well enough where you can write real programs in it. So we recently found out that the Gene Network group, for example, have been working on a genetic gene explorer live in the browser using Hoot, and they said it's performant and nice, and we have no idea they were doing it. I'd love to hear more of that. Build something cool and show it off. You can build cool tech demos. Of course, a bunch of us have used it for games and the game jam and stuff, but building really practical things, I think, is interesting. Of course, we're interested in hearing people's experience with what ends up happening when they, if they run into issues, file bug reports and etc. But we also want to hear your success stories. It's really important. And I would like to have the homepage of the Guile website have an interpreter right there where you can play around with Guile, without having to install it on your computer. I think that would be a big step forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of experience at least gives someone a very easy way to get their feet wet with the language and the environment, so that they may decide, okay, maybe I'll try to install Guile or install Hoot and check it out. Let's see. So is there anything else? I mean, you mentioned that user-authored macros is coming now to Guile Hoot. Is there any other big changes that are coming in the next Guile Hoot or Spritely Hoot release?
I think one of the Well, I mean, in a certain sense, there are other changes. There's applicable structs, which is a weird, obscure thing that very few people know about. They're basically records that you can apply functions, because we use them in Goblins in some places. The biggest feature that's coming is Goblins, right?
Mhm.
The real version of Goblins that has OCAP in the browser. One of the interesting things about Hoot is the way it's been developed has been by porting Goblins to it. Like Goblins was the test case that allowed Hoot to be that, and the R7RS benchmark suite has been the test program that's allowed Hoot to grow to maturity. And it's turned out to be a great way to do things. What's basically happened is Julie Sims, who works at Spritely, would basically port things in chunks where she would get, we had these kind of proto versions of Goblins, and so she ported each one of the proto versions of Goblins to make sure that they worked in Hoot, and would add horrible hacks to be able to make it work, and then ported the real version of Goblins and would add these hacks. And so then it would become David Thompson and Andy Wingo's jobs to remove those hacks one by one. And we're finally at the point where just last month we said, we're no longer having the separate Hoot hacks repository. It's done. We're working on the real version of Goblins in the browser, the real version. So that version is actually done inside of the Goblins repository. If you check out Goblins' development right now, the stuff that's happening is actually, I can't remember, Dave could confirm whether or not it's in the main branch or if it's in a separate branch, but the Goblins stuff is actually, the actual Hoot stuff that's being developed right now is happening in Goblins proper, so that it's the same repository for Goblins on Hoot and just normal Goblins. So the big feature is really that we are now approaching the point where ordinary Guile programs will be able to have the same code base compile in both Hoot and run in the Guile VM. That's a big step, right? Where you can have the same programs. Now you might have to use condexpand to be able to say, if it's Hoot, do this thing, and if it's not, do this other thing. We've had to do that a few places in Goblins, but it's actually very surprising just how much we're able to move to be using the same amount of code. And I see Dave Thompson in the chat has confirmed that the Goblins on Hoot changes keep getting merged to me. You can tell how much of an executive director I've become, because I used to be the main person doing all the work on Goblins, and now it's Jessica and Julie and Dave and basically doing all that stuff every day. But anyway, hopping back from that for a moment.
Yeah. So is it the case that very soon someone would be able to write a Guile application in the browser and use Goblins to communicate with a Guile scheme server, basically, to have like a client server application?
Yes, that's exactly where we're going.
Awesome.
You'll be able to have, and even more excitingly than that, not just client server, peer-to-peer, where it doesn't matter whether or not the peer is running in the browser or running on the server or on the desktop, right? It can be any one of those contexts. So that is the direction that we're going to, which is really exciting.
So you could basically have like an ad hoc chat program where two people are communicating only through the browser and not a central server, effectively.
That's right. We're looking at, some of this gets into like the OCAPN and the net layers abstractions, but yes, you can move to a direction where the server is not doing any important logic at all, or there may not even be a server if we use like WebRTC as like as a transport. One interesting thing about Goblins and OCAPN, by the way, is that the CapTP stuff that does a distributed programming part is a separate abstraction from underneath that, this thing called net layers, which is really a net layers is an interface in which you plug in multiple specific net layers. So you can use ordinary TCP plus TLS, or you can use like the web sockets going through an encrypted relay, or you can use Tor Onion services, which are slow but have a certain degree of anonymity, and stuff like that. And those are all abstracted out. So all of that power of OCAPN is coming to the browser very soon. And yes, it won't really matter where the particular Goblins peers are that you're communicating with, which should be really exciting.
Yeah, that is really cool to me. I think that I am motivated for the next Lisp game jam to try and use Goblins to at least have some kind of multiplayer game that is just purely in the browser. It'd be pretty interesting to see how to make that work. I mean, I guess it probably does need some server just to facilitate um, not a connection, but facilitate arranging a game between two people potentially. But I don't know. That's probably something we can discuss.
You could share a capability link directly with somebody.
Mm.
If you say, I have this game I've set up, and you just send it to them over your chat, right? You don't even need a connect, like hook somebody up with a connection server. That's only necessary if you want to connect together um players who don't know each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you know each other, you can just give each other a OCAP, and they're called sturdy refs, but it's effectively a link
Yeah.
to open a connection.
Interesting. Okay, that's really cool. Then I think that's definitely something worth experimenting with on the next game jam. Let's see. I think I've seen some questions flying by. Technomog says possible to use Tailscale as a network layer.
It would be possible. Nobody's done that. If you're interested in adding a teal scale net layer, that actually could be a really interesting contribution to Goblins. All of our stuff is open source. We only do open source things. It's all under Apache v2. If you'd like to add a tail scale net layer, I'd find that very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Let me go to the IRC chat and check what's going on there. Probably going to skip quite far ahead. Fade asks, is there a DHT, distributed hash table, in Goblins?
DHTs are not fundamental. Dave Thompson answered this a little bit, but you could use a net layer that uses a DHT, but it's not essential to Goblins' operation.
Okay. Let's see. Daphne says, would Spritely fund or otherwise support that work? Oh, I missed the previous thing where that she's referring to.
Yeah, I can't tell which thing. Is it the Guile on Windows? I'm not sure.
Could be Guile on Windows. I saw Fade say something. Is it even politically feasible to improve Guile on Windows? Yes, I think it's politically feasible. I don't really see anything that's preventing that. I think it's more of a technical issue and a lack of time for contributors to finish fixing things. I think that there was maybe Mike Pell or someone else was working on fixing some of the issues that Guile had on Windows, but that may have been done. It's just I don't know if it's been merged.
I don't know either. I remember it came up on a call. Actually, one of our Hoot calls with Andy Wingo, Dave Thompson brought up the patch set. But I don't know what happened since then. Andy's incredibly busy right now. But the what? But I regarding the question of Goblins on Windows. Well, in a certain sense, the answer is already yes, because Hoot means that Goblins runs on every platform because every platform has a browser, right? But if you want to talk about natively, right? To answer the question of could Spritely fund it? Well, the answer is Spritely could fund it if somebody funded Spritely to fund it, right? Like Spritely could organize the work. We don't have the money to be able to focus on that right now ourselves. In a certain sense, what Spritely's bet is that focusing on native versions of every platform is beyond our resources. Would love to see it, but we can't afford to do that. However, every platform has a browser, so the cheap version of getting things on every platform is to build things for the browser, and then you're on every platform. Right now, it's of course still great to have native versions of things. For example, React started out with only browser-based versions of things that it basically embedded things, and then along came React Native that uses like the same API, I think, I don't really know, with like native widgets and stuff like that. That type of, I think that supporting Guile on other platforms is really great, really good. It's worthwhile. It's not our focus, right? And the only reason that it would come within the realm of our focus is if there was funding that would align with the work that we plan on doing within Spritely that we could end up achieving. Now, if somebody said, we love Spritely, we really want native Spritely applications on Windows and OS X, we would say, great. Let's see what that would amount to as in terms of work, right? And what that would amount to as in terms of cost, basically.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. So going back to our list of questions, you've covered this a little bit already, but why Skyle? Jeez, you can tell that it's almost 7:30 and I haven't eaten yet. Why Scheme and why Guile? Now, I know that the original work for Goblins was done on Racket, and you ended up porting it to Guile. So why is it so? I think maybe why Guile is a more important question, and you may have already sort of answered this in some ways, but maybe we have a more focused discussion on that. But I think that what you were saying before about Scheme, at least, is that it's a Lisp. It's more of an interactive development environment, and then it gives you lexical environments or lexical scoping, which enables you to do encapsulation to protect things from the consumer of the capabilities. But maybe you can go into more detail about why Scheme was ideal for this and why other languages maybe aren't as well suited as Scheme for this purpose.
Right. So let's go down our language hierarchy, and we'll start with Lisp, then Scheme, then Guile specifically, right? So starting with Lisp, right? Why a Lisp, right? So I said this a bit earlier. I've been planning on writing a blog post about this. Maybe somebody will hear this and beat me to it. It's okay if you want to, actually. Just quote me on the phrase. Lisp is clay. That's the phrase that I've been trying to kind of push around for a while. And another way of putting that is Lisp has the power of composable domain-specific languages. Now, I know we have a bunch of Geeks fans on here. We also probably have more than enough people who have looked at Nix. You can tell the difference between Geeks and Nix if you take a look at the smoothness of how the languages are composed. Nix combines many different languages, and it's an uncomfortable combination at the boundary, right? So composable domain-specific languages is very important, right? You know, one of the things that was really appealing to me about Lisp always was the idea that it was this moldable environment in which you could really solve the problems you need to solve. Now, a lot of people over-focus on the macro side of things, but actually, I don't think the macro things are as critical. There are very few macros in Goblins. Goblins, we support macros. Like, we have macros as in terms of making things more convenient. We always make sure things can work without macros first. The reality is having a unified syntactic environment, right, where everything just looks like parentheses, means that creating a new language feature, which the programming language designers did not put in the effort to have a special new language syntax for, means that every new language feature you add, whether it's via procedure or via macro or whatever, has the same level of priority in Lisp, right? And can achieve the same level of comfortable composition. This is really key and something that people really miss because people over-focus on the macro component. Macros take that to the next level because you can add syntactic convenience when you need it. But I don't actually think macros are the most essential part that actually comes out of that clay-like nature. It exists even when you only focus on the Lambda case. So starting with that we have a Lambda calculus-like environment, and you've got this clay-like environment where you can combine things. It gave the environment in which we could really figure out what the right shape needed to be for the future of distributed programming. Now, other programming languages might do the same thing they've done to Lisps for ages, and they might say, oh, those Spritely people figured things out. Let's just go take that and put that in our language. Fine, sure, go ahead and do that. But we were able to figure it out because we had a Lisp, right, where we were able to do language experimentation without having to write new programming languages, right? That's really important. And being able to use all the programming language features. Now, we're getting to Scheme. Why a Scheme? So Scheme, as you already hinted, David, is having lexical scope, having syntactic closures was actually key for us using being able to figure out Spritely's security model. So there's a great paper by Jonathan Rees called a security kernel based on the Lambda calculus. It basically shows if you have a lexically scoped language and you take it really seriously, you can end up having a secure, basically you end up having a security environment. So closures and lexical scope are not an incidental cool feature for us. They're actually critical. And the fact that so we could choose to use something like Common Lisp, but the reality is that it's very common to have first class function passing behavior as a core part of Goblins, and it's awkward to do in a Lisp 1 in a way that it's not awkward to do. Sorry, it's awkward to do in a Lisp 2, like Common Lisp, in a way that it's not as awkward in Scheme. You can do it, but it's much more comfortable in Scheme. So that's important. And also it's a language I liked, right? So the other thing is that I like Lisps and I like Scheme. And when Spritely started out, it was me figuring things out, right? Me individually and my personal preferences and biases, right? And I had spent a lot of time in the Scheme community, partly because of David Thompson, our CTO, had written some interesting demos that got me excited in some of his game engine things. And also because of the Geeks community. But when I started working on Spritely, I was like, okay, well, which programming language, which scheme should I use? And I just assumed it would be Guile initially. But then I discovered Racket and Dr. Racket. And one of the things that Racket had was this programming language IDE called Dr. Racket. And I was really worried about, I need to be able to make sure it's not just Emacs users who can use the future of what I'm trying to build, the Spritely's tools. And since Racket had that with Dr. Racket, I was like, oh, this is the answer. And Racket, for a while, I was trying to sell it as Racket is the Python of Lisps. It's got a standard library. Anything you want to do, you can already do in Racket. And I think that generally was fairly true. And I spent quite a bit of time in the Racket community because of that. But Racket's focus is actually on programming language research, and they have this hash lang thing. And one of the things that it encourages is for people to write not Lisps, right? They create a new surface syntax. In hash langs often don't compose with each other.
Yep.
You can't combine them together the way that you can combine. It actually loses the Lisp is clay like promise. Now you can combine them together sometimes, but it's people really want you to use their hash lang. And for me, it was always important that Goblins be a library. And so when this is a disagreement I got into a lot of people, and when Rhombus came around, initially described as Racket 2, I got really worried. Now because I got so worried, I started thinking, maybe I should go back to Guile. And one of the other really painful things in Racket was debugging Goblins programs. It was incredibly difficult to debug. Guile is actually a pain in the ass to debug sometimes, but it's way less of a pain in the ass to debug than Racket. So I had written this prototype version of Goblins on a train ride, and Jessica Talon had started working, and she's like, oh, this is so much easier using Guile. So we should actually use we should actually switch to this. And at that time, we were having a conversation with the Racket people, and I asked Matthew Flatt, can you promise me that any new programming language features he will introduce into Racket will not require this new language, that everything can work in the S-expression environment, so that the S-expression environment won't become second class? And he said, I'm not going to make that promise to you at this time. And I said, okay, well, that answers it. We're going all in on Guile. And so we came back to Guile land, and ultimately that was the right choice. I think it brought us closer to the Geeks community again. It led to Hoot being something that we could prioritize because we have much easier access to communicate, I think, with the Guile developers than we did with the Racket developers, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, the Guile community definitely needs new things like this to kind of put some life back into sort of the idea that you can write applications with Guile. I mean, right now, the biggest sort of headline of Guile is Geeks. I think you can manage your system with Geeks. You can do software development with how Geeks works by writing scheme code. But yeah, I think that Hoot and Goblins definitely are going to make Guile much more of a viable option. So I think that Guile really needed something like that. It needed something to bring some relevance back for programmers to be interested to use it again, aside from Geeks. So it's really important for that. The one thing that you said in all of that I kind of laughed to myself about is the idea that a Lisp 1 is better than a Lisp 2 or a Lisp N for actually making kind of your own language functionality, because of the way that it looks so transparent whenever you're passing symbols around, and you don't have to do fun call or other kinds of weird invocations or use special syntax to refer to functions. So that's also my belief about Scheme, is that sure, you can use syntaxes to add new language functionality, but the language itself, if you write programs in kind of a functional style where you're passing around higher order functions, it just looks more like you're writing specifications for behavior than you're sort of writing language syntax. So yeah, I can definitely understand why you would want to choose Scheme over Common Lisp or other Lisps, just because of the fact that you can do so much to make a custom sort of programming style or language functionality just with the core Scheme features without macros at all. So yeah, I definitely get that. So let's see. We got about 20 minutes left. I do want to talk about the rest of these topics, so maybe we can kind of hit them fast, because I would like to give you some time to do a demo if you want to still try to do a demo, but we can do that a little bit later. So for the people who are fans of Geeks in the channel, how is it that Spritely is going to impact Geeks in the coming months and years?
So try to be faster on these responses. Right now, Julie Sims is working on porting the Shepherd, which is the init and daemon management system that Geeks uses, to use Goblins, and that'll actually allow Shepherd to become much more of kind of a DevOps platform in certain ways. You'll be able to kind of actually message other Shepherd using machines and get them to start and restart services and kind of intercooperate. So that's kind of the first step that we see. I'd like to also see, if it's possible, I'd really love to see Geeks' own build system actually switch over to use Goblins. I know there's some interest in that from some of the Geeks developers, not all of them. But I think that, in general, at the very least, I think that we're intercooperative between Geeks and Spritely Land. So I think that the success of one raises the success of the other.
For sure. I really think that there's a big case to be made for using Goblins in the Geeks daemon, because they're currently working on rewriting it in Guile anyway. So if you're doing that, then why would you not want to have a protocol level capability security model that could make it so that maybe Geeks could even simplify how the build daemon operates, to not have to worry so much about like system level permissions, but worry about capability permissions for allowing users to send jobs to the Geeks build daemon, etc. I don't know. I mean, I'm not like an expert on how all that works, but it feels like there's something there.
Yeah, and what if you wanted to be able to pass off build jobs between multiple machines and
Yeah,
so on, and have them coordinate? It could just be a natural thing that falls out of using Goblins. Yeah,
yeah,
I think it's exciting too. I would clearly like to see more success, like more work done on that type of thing
yeah.
myself.
So I think that's definitely going to end up happening eventually. People will see the light and they'll come around to it. But I think the biggest thing first is just getting the Geeks build daemon rewritten in Guile, and then from there, anything else is possible.
That's my guess then too.
Yeah. So what's coming in 2025 for Guile users then? Like any big developments that you see coming down the road? Obviously, more and more work towards fleshing out Guile Hoot and Goblins especially. But is there anything specific that you had in mind on that?
Well, I mean, I think 2025 is going to be the year of Guile on the browser, right? To kind of meme that old curse against Linux on the desktop. But I'm going to say it, Guile in the browser. I think 2025 is the year, right? I think this is the year in which we can really actually start to do really interesting things in the browser. So I'm not going to really predict beyond that, other than to say that what I also would really like to see, it's something we really want to have happen. Getting the resources for it is very challenging. So getting more resources towards Spritely can help, but also it's also something that people can play around with on their own. I would really like to see Guile development tools, like Guile development tooling that allows you to play around with Guile and even around with Goblins and etc. in the browser. And that's something that you don't have to wait on Spritely to start playing with, right? You can use Hoot. You, if you're excited about it, can start making more developer tools in the browser.
Yeah. There's a huge potential, I think, for making sort of a new kind of paradigm for web UI development. I mean, taking inspiration from React, and I know that Dave Thompson's done some work on this already. He's done some prototypes, and I don't really know. I think that they're sort of in a repo somewhere. They're not really turned into a library, but if people started working on trying to take the ideas from React and then using Scheme and SXML to do like templating of UI, and then basically the benefits of things like delimited continuations for doing kind of synchronous looking asynchronous code. You can have some really nice looking UI code that it could be pretty nice to develop. And then from that, then you could probably start building development tools in the browser that are really nice to use. And you can even have like a Emacs-like environment in the browser with an editor. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that can be done. So I think that if people are kind of motivated to work on cool projects like that, that could be a really big area where people can jump in and help to sort of carve out a place in the future of writing Guile applications in the browser. I mean, I would love to do that, but I don't really have a whole lot of time to do it at the moment. But I'm sure there are people who would like to do it. Probably the Spritely Institute forum would be a good place for people to discuss those ideas with you all, right? If you don't know the Spritely Institute, if you go to spritely.institute, I think there's a link to the forum there. And maybe they could make some posts. Obviously, you could talk about it on the System Crafters forum too, but if you want to talk directly to the Spritely development team, it's better to go to the Spritely forum to discuss those ideas. Let's see, what else? Yeah, so is there something that you would like to show in terms of like goblins or anything today?
Well, so I guess we've got 15 minutes left. I can show a live Goblins demo if people in the audience would like to see what is it like to program in Goblins. I can do that live. But I can also say, like, if you're interested in all of this stuff, I want to throw in one more thing, which is that if you want to play around with some stuff, we actually have some games. If you go on the spritely.institute/donate page, there's actually a link to several games on there. There's a link to the arcade thing, which I think is spritely.institute/arcade. There's several games you can actually play around with. One thing I want to mention is if you donate at the $20 a month or higher level, you can actually get your name in the credits of the games that we're putting out as demos for Spritely. So I don't want people to forget hearing about that. That's an exciting thing. But I'm happy to jump straight into doing a demo if people would like to see that of Goblins programming live.
I mean, I think that people would like to see what it looks like because many people have heard about goblins, but they don't really know what it looks like to use it. I mean, it doesn't have to be like very in depth. Just something that just gives a just a little sample. Let's say.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it live.
Hopefully, I can scale the screen up enough that where people can read your.
Let me try to make the font pretty big, and then I'll screen share.
All right.
Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to screen share. Let's see. Entire screen. We'll do this. Do the YOLO version of things where you share your whole screen instead of a specific thing.
Seems good.
Okay, good. I don't need everybody to see that I'm sharing my the screen sharing notification. So I've got Goblins open right here, right? So I'm gonna really do this live. I'm not looking at any tutorial or anything, but if you want to look at a tutorial yourself, you can pull up the Goblins manual and read this tutorial here. You can also actually go to the Spritely Institute homepage, and there's a link to this thing called The Heart of Spritely, which shows you how everything works and is an interesting paper about it. It shows it in both Scheme and Wisp, believe it or not. So you can see it in both of those. If the parentheses scare you, you can see it in this more white spacey based version. Thank you to Amy Grin for making it so that both of those work in there, by the way. So let's do a live demo, right? So I've already imported modules, Goblins here. So I'm gonna do define a vat, and I'm gonna do spawn vat name, and I'll just put a there, right? So, and I'll do enter vat. Now there's actually, you can do comma help goblins, and it gives you this set of helpful information here. So I can do enter comma enter vat and then a vat, and what it'll do is it does this thing that you normally see when you've got an exception, like if I type something that's nonsensical, like I do divide 1 by 0, it says, oh, you're entering a new prompt, right? What's interesting is that when you do enter vat, you see a similar thing where it bumps up the number here, and it says goblins/a, so it helps you know that you're an a vat right here. Now, once I do that, I'm actually able to, I wish I could turn off my appointments because it's going to keep telling me about this appointment thing I've got coming up, but whatever. I'm going to make a new actor. So I'm going to show you the simplest actor there is, right? Something which can just which just says hello to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to define this greeter, which says, and it takes this become thing. So here it is. So we're going to say our procedure takes your name. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do format. This is just a string formatting utility in Guile. And we're going to say, hello, whatever your name is, my name is, and then we're going to say our name, right? And then, let's do that right here. We'll say, hello, your name, my name is my name, right? So now we can spawn Alice, who, and we type spawn greeter Alice. Now, how do we get Alice to say something to us? In Goblins, for synchronous call return, like if you want to call Alice as if she was a procedure, you use this dollar operator. And so we use $Alice, and we say, our name is Alfred, right? And she says, hello, Alfred, my name is Alice. Now, look how simple this is. You've just got an outer procedure, which is your constructor, and an inner procedure, which is your behavior, right? And this procedure is just constructing a new string and returning it. And that's all we had to do. Now we've created a Goblins object. And yes, this object could work over the network. We've already created a hello world object that actually could work over the network if we wanted to. But this is only so interesting. What if we want to change state, right? So now I'm going to create the simplest state holding thing in the world. I'm going to create a cell. So this cell is actually going to use the become thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to say this cell, it takes an optional argument, which is the value that the state currently holds. Now, here is a thing that you can do in Goblins, which is you might want to, of course we could use methods on this, but I'm going to actually, instead of doing methods, I'm going to show you this thing called case lambda. Actually, I'm going to show you this first before we do things. Case lambda works like the following way. If you take no arguments, this might just be one arg, right? And then if you take two args, right? If you take one argument instead of 0 arguments, so this is something, then we're going to return a list that says something. So this is actually no args, sorry. No args. And this one is one arg, and it returns something, right? So this returns a procedure. I'm going to take this procedure, and I'm going to invoke it immediately, right? Or we'll give it a name. Define it, foo proc, right? So now I've got this case lambda. My indentation's all messed up, whatever. But I'm going to call foo proc with no arguments. This is not a Goblins thing. This is just a scheme thing. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to, for my something, for the second case, I'll pass in hello, right? And so it says one arg hello. So you can see this is an interesting way. With just case lambda, you have a way of being able to do two different types of behavior for the nothing case and the something case. So now let's go back to our cell that we were defining earlier. So our cell is going to have this become capability, which we're going to actually use this time. And it's going to take an optional argument, which is val. So case lambda. So the no argument case, it just returns the val. This is our getter. And for our setter case, we're going to take a new val. And we're going to return instead of returning something, we're going to say we're going to become a new cell that also has to become. It's going to need that to be able to say that it's becoming a thing. But instead, it's going to become a new val. Now, look at this. What have we done? We've created a cell. And so what we can do, we can create a treasure chest. Spawn a cell with gold in it. Now, I can invoke this chest, and it gives me gold. But if I invoke the chest with another argument, and I put a sword in it, now if I invoke the chest again, it says sword. So here it is. You'll notice no mutation recurred, actually. It only returned a value because it actually returns this wrapped version of the thing that I would like to become. It says, I would like to become a new version of a cell that actually has this value. Now you'll notice if you are a functional programmer, you're like, this seems like they're pulling off functional programming tricks. And in fact, we are. So just to show off how much of functional programming this is, I'm going to show off what would end up happening where, what if I wrap this in a begin? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to use a classic Guile development debugging technique. PK lets us just print out something. So I want to say foo bar. PK will just print it out, foo and bar, and it'll return the bar. So it's just a little print debugging front. So I'm going to say begin. And then I'm going to say PK, what's the current value in the chest? Right? So it's going to be first. So we'll say chest 1, right? And then I'm going to change it. I'm going to change the chest to be to contain unobtainium. And then PK chest 2, what's in the chest, right? And now I'm going to throw an error. Yikes. And then finally, I'm going to see what's in chest. I'm going to actually change chest again to be chest even more unobtainium. And I'm also going to do another PK. Did we get here? All right. What do you think is going to happen when I run this? Because you know I can change this chest. Do you have a guess, David?
Oh, so let's see. You're changing it the first. Let's see. Yeah, the second time. I don't know. Is it going to recover after the error?
Let's find out. So chest 1 says sword, right? That's what it was before. Chest 2 is unobtainium, and then it catches the error. It says yikes. We expected that, right? And it throws us in this little debugging prompt. Now I'm going to quit out of that. Okay, so the real question is, what's in the chest now? Do you have a guess?
I hope it's even more unobtainium, but I don't know.
Oh, do you hope it's unobtainium? Because something bad happened. Wouldn't it even be better if it noticed that an error happened and it rolled back?
Ooh. It would be better.
Still stored. Now, when I say that Goblins is time transactional and time traveling, you can see what I mean. And in fact, this is where things get really cool. I can, if I do help Goblins, you'll notice that there's something here that says, ooh, vat log enable. I can turn that on. Vat log enable. And what it's going to start doing is it's actually going to let me move back and forwards in time. So if I choose to do, if I do this thing, if I can end up starting to do things where I set the chest to be, like blah, and then I, do this whole thing again with the begin and do all these things, and it gives me the error. I can do vat log. What is it? Not vat log. What is it? Vat tail. And you can see it has these multiple churns that it sees happened. Actually, I probably should not be doing this, but I can actually move. I can actually debug this. I can do vat debug against 17, and it enters a new prompt. And I hope I get this right. Let's find out. So if I do $, no, is it $, or is it vat vat peak? Yeah, so I can do vat peak against the chest. It says that it's still stored, even though now, at the time that the thing occurred, when it was 17, it said it was stored. But if I quit out of that and I do vat debug against 18, you can see it shows where it threw the error. But now that I've exited out of the debugging context, I can do the whole, well, I'll just type it in manually, $chest, and you can see that it says blah. What's really interesting is that if you look at the history of the things that had happened up here, I had turned on the vat logging, and I did this chest against blah here, and I changed the chest contents to blah, and then I did all these things. I can move back and forth. I can move back in time to the way that my objects existed before the problem occurred. And in fact, there is a whole blog post on the Spritely Institute blog that will show you how to use a time traveling debugger that has, let's see, it's got this cute goblin holding a, it's really going back here. A goblin holding the time traveling debugger. Dave shows off this whole demo that has multiple of these event loop VATs talking to each other. And you send messages. I haven't really shown off the asynchronous message passing on this because I was just showing off the basics. But like Dave creates a little dungeon crawler. And you're like, why did the dungeon crawler break? And in fact, it breaks across 3 different event loops that might be 3 machines over the network. And it'll show you a complicated graph of, okay, this thing message this thing and this thing. And in fact, without leaving the REPL, you can do that graph. And it'll actually construct a visual graph without leaving the REPL. It will print this out in Emacs, showing you how it was that the error occurred. Goblins cares about you this much. Not only is it time traveling, but it actually wants to help you understand how your complicated asynchronous message programming stuff works. This is the future we're looking at. Error recovery, yes. Networked programming, yes. But time travel debugging that actually shows you the way that the error occurred. That's the world you're entering with Goblins as tools.
Oh, that sounds pretty amazing to me. So is that a good place, that article, a good place for people to go to sort of see more about what was happening in the demo? Unfortunately, the stream was having issues and I had to scale down your view a little bit. So people were able to see some of it, I think, but it was a little bit choppy. So is that article a good place to go?
That article is a great way to do it. I'm sorry that the stream was choppy and that people were not able to see the thing, but I'll stop sharing now.
I believe that your explanation of it, I think people were in the chat were understanding what was happening. So I think they should go check out the article because I didn't know about the graph aspect of it, that you can actually display a graph of the message passing. That's really interesting. I think that would make it much easier for any kind of application that you would be writing with the Goblins to sort of understand what's happening. Let me try to scale this back down again to see if we can get it less choppy.
Oh, you've got the geeks cyborg in the chat. Geeks cyborg in the chat. By the way, you really need to get that guy on your show because there's that's the guy who is wearing a full-time Emacs computer in front of his face that he walks around with keyboard pants and lives his life in org mode as a cyborg and on top of Emacs and Geeks.
Who is this?
This is Zacchaeus Zaki. I gotta connect the two of you. Complete System Crafters material.
Okay. Do you have his nick in the chat?
Yeah, it's EIKCAZ. Yeah.
Okay. I think I've seen that nick before. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Okay, so we're sort of Okay, I see you there. Ixaz. Sorry. I'm terrible at pronouncing.
Just call him Zaki.
Zaki. Okay. All right. Sounds good. So we're at the end of the time. Is there anything else, like any last thoughts that you want to convey to people before we sign off here?
Really, it's just that I would love to see people do 2 things, right? One is if you can donate at any level you can donate to Spritely, it matters a whole bunch. Any donation you do goes directly towards advancing this ecosystem, right? The ecosystem you care about here. You are funding engineer time directly. So that is, I think really worthwhile. And furthermore, if you can play with our tools, I would love to see people play with our stuff, tell us about their experiences, and so on and so forth. So at Spritely, we're a small organization. We're a small nonprofit. We care about the future of the internet. And the System Crafters community is exactly the type of people who really we need looking at our stuff, playing with our stuff, and working with us to advance the future together.
Absolutely. Yes, everybody definitely go check out the donation page for the Spritely Institute. That's spritely.institute/donate. And consider helping out at any of the levels there. And like we were mentioning before, if you have an employer who does donation matching, you could probably do a one-time donation and have them match the donation, which would be really useful for them as well. And a nice way for you to get your employer to kick in some money to actually help, flesh out the Guile ecosystem, which would be kind of nice. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Christine, for coming on again. I really appreciate you spending your time to explain what Spritely's been up to and the technical details about Goblins and Hoot, etc. We'll definitely have you and some of the other engineers from Spritely back on again in the future, probably in the near future, especially around times when big things are being released. So if people were interested in what's going on here, definitely follow Christine on the Fediverse. I don't really have your handle ready here, Fossadon. Let me just see if I can pull you up real quick.
I'm at C.Webber at social.coop.
Okay, at CWeber at social.coop. Follow Christine because Christine's posting all the good stuff. So you'll be able to see some things there. There's also a Spritely Institute account as well on Fediverse that you can follow. Probably if you go to spritely.institute, you'll find that there. And yeah, that's great. So once again, thank you very much, Christine, and thank you all of you who were here today to watch and participate in this discussion. Let me know in the comments if you think that the quality of the stream was terrible, because I know it kind of was. I apologize for that. It's just the way it goes sometimes. But hang on there for a second, Christine. I'll chat with you a second after the stream goes down. But thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate your time and attention. And until next time, happy hacking. We'll see you.
Thanks, everybody.